Section 19 of A Deep Water Voyage by Paul E. Stevenson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Barry Eads. Section 19. October 26th. This was another day of light winds, hot, sultry atmosphere, and heavy downpours of rain. We made but a little more than a degree of latitude, and in addition were driven over to the eastward by a northwest wind. We have reached the bay at the worst season for a fast run-up, and we may be seesawing about in the same place for days, like we did in the North Atlantic, except that we haven't the delightful, balmy atmosphere of 30 degrees north and 40 degrees west. The mate continues to skylark with Dan, and this afternoon treated him to a much-needed bath. It had been raining in a perfect deluge for an hour or so, but as there wasn't much wind, the awning was set, which kept off most of the rain, so that we could stay on the poop with some little degree of comfort. The forward end of this awning extends some distance beyond the poop, both corners being lashed to the mizzen shrouds. And in this forward end an immense amount of water had collected, perhaps 2 barrelfuls, causing the awning to sag down in a great bulb. The idea occurred to the mate that this would be an excellent opportunity to give Dan a bath, of which he had long stood in need. So he sung out from the poop, "Dan, lay aft here a minute." The unsuspecting youth came shambling round the corner of the deckhouse, and stood awaiting orders near the mizzen hatch. "Nearer," said the mate, "I want to tell you something." So Dan marched up and finally stood just where Mr. Ryan wanted him, right under the big water bulb that projected over the poop. Then, telling him to look forward at something to distract his attention, the mate, with a quick motion, leaned over the poop rail and cut the lashing of the awning. The maneuver was a splendid success. Down came the whole mass of water, some 70 or 80 gallons, I should think, directly on the head of the unfortunate youth, beating him to the deck and for a moment blotting him out of sight. And when the water had run off, the most dismal spectacle I ever saw gathered itself up shivering and crawled forward under the bulwarks. 10 or a dozen of the men witnessed the affair, and each, unable to control himself, exploded in a guffaw that brought the skipper on deck, glaring about to know why such a row was made. But as each man was busily employed and wore the countenance of a gravedigger, he couldn't say anything, and after scowling at them for a few minutes, he went below again. Later I heard Dan tell the cook that he thought we had been boarded by a heavy sea, though for the first seconds he didn't know anything at all, for so great a volume of water falling plumb on his head almost stretched him on the deck. Latitude at noon, 5 degrees 25 minutes north, longitude 91 degrees 15 minutes east. October 27th. The heat and humidity have increased, and both are just as bad as they were under the line. We made no more than 65 miles of latitude and scarcely any longitude, and on account of holystoning the poop, we had to keep below all day, which was very disagreeable. The work of holystoning is no easy one, for the poop deck being varnished, it has to be rubbed perfectly clear and clean before another coat is applied, and though 6 men are hard at it, the work goes on slowly. We are just abreast of the southern end of the Nicobars, a small cluster of islands immediately north of Sumatra, in longitude 93 degrees 30 minutes east. The largest is only 30 miles by 14, the entire population not exceeding 350 souls. Some of the islands are hilly, but most of them are very flat and covered with coconut trees, and are also noted for yams, which are produced in great quantities and of fine quality. The people are savage and have a bad reputation for piracy, trade being carried on by bartering. Deeds of piracy became so frequent that in 1870 the Indian government inquired into the matter and placed the islands under the rule of the superintendent of the Andamans, to the northward of the Nicobars. The only man on board who seems thoroughly satisfied with himself and everything else is the little East Indian cook. Nothing seems to disturb him, either the steward's temper or the length of the voyage. He still keeps his pots and kettles just as bright as he did months ago, and he is as blithe and good-humored as ever, after he has cleaned up the galley for the night as he leans against the chicken coop, tooting his little bamboo whistles. That we do not sight vessels, I think, is very strange, for we are right in the track of steamers bound to and from Singapore and Colombo. I imagined that we would have seen 2 or 3 a day, to any one of which we would have made our number, and tomorrow our relatives and friends would know that we were in the Bay of Bengal, within a fortnight probably of Calcutta. I fancy that at home they're getting uneasy about us, for we haven't spoken anything for many weeks, and we are by no means certain that those who did speak us reported us. In fact, I am of the opinion that the only vessel who has done so was the steamer we sighted on July 9th, that hoisted an answering pendant in reply to our signals. Latitude 6 degrees 30 minutes north, longitude 91 degrees 13 minutes east. Sunday, October 28th. We had no wind at all today till 4 in the afternoon, when we were regaled with a fresh breeze from north, which put us a matter of only 7 points off our course. But a breeze of any sort is such a luxury to us that we grin and bear it with hearts so hardened that any amount of headwinds wouldn't make us flinch. At 6 o'clock we tacked ship and stood to the westward, the wind shortly after veering to north-northeast, so that finally we could look up to within 3 points of our course, north by west. So our 17th week on board has not commenced so well as it might, but we hope for a better ending. On our beam to the westward is Ceylon, the earthly paradise, as it has often been called, distant a little more than 500 miles. It is the country above all others in the world that I have long wished to visit. Its very name is a word to conjure with, and I always think of it in connection with cinnamon, cloves, and other eastern spices. On the ocean, or eastern, side of the island are bold, rugged mountains, and but little verdure, while on the other side the tropical vegetation attains a wild luxuriance unequaled, probably, in any other country in the world. The scenery about Kandy, 60 miles from the sea, in the heart of the mountain's interior, is said to be more beautiful than any other region yet discovered. Colombo is the capital and chief city, though Goa, at the southern extremity of the islands, formerly enjoyed the position Colombo now holds. Trincomalee, on the east coast, possesses a magnificent basin, and is perhaps unsurpassed in beauty and security by any other harbor in the world. Colombo only a few years ago could boast of no other haven of refuge than an open roadstead. But recently a huge breakwater, a mile and a quarter long and wide enough for 4 carriages to drive abreast over its smooth surface of dressed stone, was built at a cost of £700,000, and at the present time the harbor is an excellent one, though small. Ceylon as a name is indelibly connected with pearls, probably the greatest pearl fisheries in the world being conducted on the northwest coast in the Gulf of Mannar. Enormous quantities of rain fell again today, and we had no sights at all, the dead reckoning putting us in latitude 7 degrees north, longitude 89 degrees 58 minutes east. October 29th. We continue to make but little progress, our northing for the 24 hours amounting to only 6 miles over a degree. We also continue to have deluges of rain, so that one must stop below with ports and companionway closed, or melt on deck in oilskins, 2 evils between which there is no choice. The rainfalls are so tremendous that I cannot compare them to any that I ever saw before. I actually believe that more rain fell in 30 minutes about noon today than fell in any 12 hours in the Atlantic. It is simply extraordinary. In the heaviest downpours, the rain falling into the sea sounds like a small cataract, and a dense spray so thick as to hide the surface of the water covers the sea to the depth of about a foot. My little scheme for preventing the entrance of water through the port over our bunk continues to do good work, though I forgot to squeeze out the towel this morning, and the water entered and ran down between the mattress and the bottom of the bunk, and there being no sun to dry things out, we will be uncomfortable till we get the northeast winds and bright sunshine, for which we are so longingly hoping. Captain Kingdon, too, is anxious for some bright weather, so that he can do some varnishing. The poop presents a very scraggy and dilapidated appearance. The deck, companion house, wheel box, rail, and gratings, every varnished object has been scraped, holystoned, and sandpapered perfectly clean, and the result is far from beautiful. In fact, the poop gives to the whole vessel the appearance of a weather-beaten ship laid up in the Erie Basin, unable to get a charter. Give us 2 days of fine weather, though, and all this will change, and the whole after end of the ship will glisten and shine in all the glory of fresh varnish and newly polished brass. Later in the day, a nice little breeze came along from northwest by west, and at the present moment, 8 p.m., we are making good north 1/2 east. We ran into a long, heavy swell this afternoon, setting from northwest, in consequence of which, and the fact that the glass is in a very unsettled state, Captain Kingdon is watching for other cyclonic indications, for the swell shows that a hurricane, probably of a small size, is somewhere in the bay. And though the glass has not fallen enough to indicate that it is in the immediate vicinity, the unsettled state of the barometer is the cause of some uneasiness. Latitude at noon, 8 degrees 6 minutes north, longitude 90 degrees 30 minutes east. October 30th. Yesterday we completed our 120th day at sea, 4 months in round numbers, and present indications point to our sighting the light ship at the Sand Heads before another week has passed. We are doing very well and made nearly 2 degrees of latitude in the 24 hours. I have altogether forgotten to mention our list to port. It is due to the squall and knockdown we had in the Gulf Stream a few days out from New York. It seems strange that a cargo of tightly packed wooden cases should shift, but when a ship has been at sea a week or so and has had any rolling to speak of, the cases work constantly together and apart, till there will be perhaps a half inch of space between each case, which means a good deal in the full width of the vessel. Then, if she takes a bad knockdown, as we did, away goes the cargo to leeward, and there is no restowing it. Our list would not be visible at a glance to anyone but a sailor, but it's none the less present, and we roll much deeper to port than to starboard. We are now approaching a group or chain of islands called the Andamans, remarkable in that but little of the inhabitants is known, though an immense amount of commerce passes by their door, so to speak. There are 3 principal islands, one almost touching the other, each about 50 miles long, North Andaman containing a mountain 3,000 feet high. The inhabitants are very remarkable, and are considered to be as low in the human race as any people on the earth. For a long time it was supposed that they were cannibals, and it is reasonable to believe that not so very long ago they were addicted to the practice of eating shipwrecked mariners, but it is positively denied that such a state of affairs now exists by the Europeans who live on the islands. The people are called Oriental Negroes, and they do bear some resemblance to the African races, though their hair is not kinky, nor are their lips so blubber-like as the Africans. They are very short, much under 5 feet in height, and even at the present time both sexes go about absolutely naked. And while the suspicion that they are still cannibals has been disproved, they even up to the present time continue to massacre shipwrecked crews whenever a vessel is unfortunate enough to go ashore in a remote locality. A strange fact connected with the Andamanders is that they are a very unhealthy race, individuals seldom reaching the 40th year, as fevers and lung diseases carry off the population in early life. During the latter part of this afternoon we witnessed a magnificent rainbow, and what is very remarkable, we apparently sailed right under it. It was an exquisite arc of color, clearly defined and very brilliant, and it actually extended right over our mastheads, each end seeming to rest on the water a couple of 100 yards on either side of the ship. It was very impressive and one of the most beautiful natural effects I ever saw. Even the men, indifferent as they usually are to phenomena of this sort, gazed in admiration at this gorgeous rainbow, under whose arch we seemed to sail for fully 7 or 8 minutes. We have had a delightful southwest breeze all day, though the long northwest swell continues to run, and is, we are happy to say, the only indications of a cyclonic disturbance we have been able to observe since yesterday, as the glass has returned to its normal condition. The ship has been pitching considerably all day. Latitude 10 degrees 4 minutes north, longitude 90 degrees 15 minutes east. October 31st. If anyone had predicted a week ago that we would have had the splendid breeze that has followed us lately, we would have hove him overboard for a false prophet. We have had a fresh breeze for 24 hours from southeast, and in that time we made 180 miles. Most people would have called it a hot wind, but to us, just up from the equator, it was comparatively cool, considering the 4 days we spent under the line. The sea here is wonderfully phosphorescent. Last night, the white caps on the crests of the seas were beautifully spangled with tiny specks of silver, while our wake could be followed in a trail of light for fully a quarter of a mile. There is another kind of phosphoric light, too, that appears in luminous patches on the surface of the water, suddenly and in the most unlooked-for places. Apparently, no motion of the water is necessary to render it visible, for I have seen it when there wasn't a ripple on the ocean. It has a most uncanny look, and is, I doubt not, the phenomenon that Coleridge mentions in his Ancient Mariner, when he says, "The water, like a witch's oils, burns blue and green and white." At noon, Great Andaman bore east, distant 65 miles, and we are now only 500 miles from the Sandheads. This is the only land that we have approached so closely since we left, except Trinidad, and the skipper thinks that the great rainfalls of yesterday and today, and the immense masses of cumulus cloud piled one on the other like bales of cotton, are due to the proximity of the Andamans and Nicobars. Speaking again of the Andamans reminds me of Port Blair, their capital, and the penal settlement of India, of which Captain Kingdon spun me a yarn today. The event that he narrated happened years ago, when upon one occasion the skipper had his brother with him as mate on a voyage from Dundee to Calcutta. The steward they had was a man with the temper of a demon, who had no more control over himself when enraged than a gorilla, and who would stop at nothing in the pursuit of vengeance. He had given a great deal of trouble during the passage, and a few weeks from Calcutta he was put in irons and kept there for 3 days. He fancied that the mate talked against him to the skipper, the mate's brother, and one day, when Captain Kingdon and his brother were leaning over the rail in earnest discussion, the steward emerged silently from the companionway, tiptoed up to the mate, and in a second had buried the steel used for sharpening carving knives up to the handle in his back, under the left shoulder blade. Then, without a word, the devil turned and walked back into the cabin, where he allowed himself to be taken without a struggle and put in confinement for the rest of the voyage. The 3rd day after the stabbing, the skipper's brother died, and on the ship's arrival in Calcutta, the man was tried, convicted, and banished for life to Port Blair. But of such a fearful temper was he possessed, that when the skipper again arrived in Calcutta, after a trading voyage to the Celebes and Moluccas, he heard that his former steward had broken out of confinement, killed 2 keepers, and had been executed before he had been 3 months in jail. A nice sort of shipmate. Latitude at noon, 12 degrees 47 minutes north, longitude 91 degrees 29 minutes east. November 1st. Counting from today, the 1st of the month, we have been 4 months at sea. We continue to make very good headway, having made precisely 2 degrees of latitude in the 24 hours. If Palmam Keep Merit Ferit is to be observed, this day certainly deserves first place in point of heat. It totally eclipsed all previous ones. The worst of it was that no awning was spread, owing to the varnishing of the skylight and compass stands, and, there being nothing to intervene, the sun shot his rays so fiercely down upon us that at noon the heat and especially the humidity had nearly reached the limit of endurance. There being no shade, the deck of the poop was as hot as a griddle, and acted in the capacity of a steam radiator in the cabin, so that in the coolest, airiest saloon ever built in a ship, and with everything wide open, the heat smothered one like an increased atmospheric pressure, and this, although a fresh breeze was blowing from southwest. I do not believe that it did much good, though, being saturated with moisture, and whenever a gust came down the companionway, it felt more like a breath from Tophet than a breeze off the blue, sparkling ocean. No wonder that Europeans die in great numbers in the east during the rains when the southwest monsoon blows. I can picture to myself the reeking swamps, fetid atmosphere, and stagnant pools of rainwater in an Indian jungle during the wet months. We are just at present abreast of Madras, the largest city on the eastern side of the Indian peninsula and the third city of the empire in population and importance. The situation is a very exposed one, there being no natural harbor at all, though some defenses against the inroads of the sea have been constructed of masonry. They were nearly destroyed, however, in the terrific hurricane of 1881 that raged over the bay with resistless violence. Madras seems to be chosen by nature as the particular point against which the fury of nearly every hurricane in that part of the world is directed. The city has probably been visited by more destructive cyclones than any other in the East. The wind during the one of May, 1872, reaching a maximum pressure of 53 pounds to the square foot, indicating a velocity of about 115 miles an hour. This is, of course, far less than the speed of the wind during a tornado in some of our western states, but the effect of a 115-mile-an-hour wind on the ocean may be imagined. And as the roadstead was perfectly open at that time, the ravages of the sea upon town and shipping were frightful. We had heavy squalls all day. Latitude at noon, 14 degrees 47 minutes north, longitude 91 degrees 26 minutes east. November 2nd. I forgot to mention the sad death of poor Bang, the skipper's Irish setter. Poor fellow, he had been on his last legs ever since we ran into the hot weather again, and it is marvelous that he lasted as long as he did. He displayed more vitality than I thought any of the lower animals were possessed of, having been on the verge of death several times. For a fortnight, though, he had been very low and unable to stand. Yet none thought he would meet his end so suddenly, as he had weathered so well his previous bad spells. But at 10 o'clock, night before last, after I had gone below to turn in, the skipper having already doused his glim, and Mr. Ryan having the watch on deck, I suddenly heard a most dismal wailing, accompanied with a shuffling of feet on the poop. I went on deck at once and saw that poor old Bang was in one of his spasms, foaming at the mouth and stumbling aimlessly about the deck, evidently in the severest agony. My wife came up at this moment, and both of us mounted to the top of the flag locker, out of harm's way, lest the dog should go mad and bite one of us, the mate standing on the other side of the skylight with his loaded club in his hand. Bang was too far gone, though, for hostilities, and gathering himself together, he began to stagger round the poop again, and it wasn't long before he walked off onto the main deck, a fall of fully 8 feet, but which didn't seem to have any effect at all on him. Captain Kingdon appeared just then and carried the poor beast up on the poop again, where, after a few minutes wandering about, during which he would walk right into a stanchion or anything else in his way, as though blind with pain and suffering, the poor old dog walked calmly overboard at the stern chocks and vanished forever. We all miss him ever so much, even if at times he was a nuisance, and it is too bad to lose him in this way, after having nursed him to within a week of port. Pete ought to put a crepe band on his arm, for the two were inseparable while on deck. The companion house rails and deck on the poop have been varnished and are now dry, so that the awning was spread again before noon today. After dinner, my wife insisted upon varnishing the gratings that lie one on each side of the standard compass. So she went to work with great gusto, only to desist in half an hour with a tremendous headache, brought on by exertion in the great heat combined with the odor of the varnish. We all told her it was a very silly thing to do, but she would go ahead, and the natural result ensued. A bad headache is not a joke with the thermometer 89 degrees in the coolest place, and without even cold water to bathe the head and face, for the coolest water is from the sea, and that is fully 85 degrees. We still continue to waft along at about 4 knots over a motionless sea, for the northwest swell has gone down and nothing but the light breeze now disturbs the quiet surface of the bay. Latitude 16 degrees 26 minutes north, longitude 91 degrees 30 minutes east. End of section 19. Section 20 of A Deep Water Voyage by Paul Eads Stevenson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Barry Eads. Section 20. November 3rd. More or less of a calm this morning after a squally night. In the early part of the evening, there was very sharp lightning in the northeast, and a large number of whiteheads showed themselves, portending hard squalls. So we stowed the sky sails and the awning, but got more rain than wind, the former coming down in cataracts. At 9 o'clock this morning, we sighted a large steamer bound north, and at 10 another. Kept away and spoke the second one and asked to be reported all well. She was one of the British India Company's boats, bound probably from Rangoon to Calcutta, and to us presented a beautiful appearance, the hull so clean and bright in comparison to our streaked and grimy sides. No one who never saw it can imagine how disreputable, as to hull, a sailing ship is after a long voyage, that part of the vessel presenting a strange contrast to the rest of the ship, which looks as if she had just gone into commission for the first time. It is rather annoying to be so near port and yet so far, for we are not more than 250 miles from the light ships, but we are not doing more than a mile and a half an hour, a fact emphasized by the steamers passing us at 12 knots and seeming to fly along like an express train. I went on deck about an hour and a half after the first steamer passed us, and was much astonished that she was not to be seen, a thin brown smoke on the northern sea line showing where she was behind the horizon. I had been so accustomed to look at sailing ships for hours after they had passed and finding them still in sight that this sudden disappearance was quite startling. The steamer will take a pilot tomorrow morning, we at any time next week. Yet I cannot say that I'm tired of the sea. On the contrary, I am more in love with it than ever. This, at the end of a long voyage, is the best proof of how fond I am of it, for there are not many people who, at the end of a passage, do not long to get ashore, though they may go to sea again in a month. But I am just as contented and comfortable as I was when the voyage began, and have not the least desire to go ashore, even though I am fully aware of the glories of the land we are about to visit. We did not undertake this voyage for the purpose of seeing India, but simply for the sake of the sea. Had the Mandalore been bound to Valparaiso, Frisco, or Hyogo, it would have made no difference to us, and neither of us gave a single thought to the termination of the voyage when we towed through the narrows and cast off the line that ran out over the bows to the little tug ahead. However, now that the end of the passage is close at hand, we are glad that it is to India we are going and not to San Francisco. I have read much of the beauty and interest of this great empire in various magazines on board, and my desire to see the country has been considerably augmented since reading an account last evening of the Nizam of Hyderabad, an Indian prince who rules over 10 million people and who has an actual income of 30 million rupees a year, equal to $7,500,000, a revenue that but few other individuals in the world enjoy. This evening we had a very sharp squall and the heaviest rain yet. I think an inch and a half of water must have fallen in 30 minutes. Latitude at noon, 17 degrees 35 minutes north, longitude 90 degrees 51 minutes east. Sunday, November 4th. This is our 19th Sunday at sea, and bar accident, it will be our last. We sighted another steamer last night bound to the southward. She presented a splendid appearance with every port glowing with light, and to our eyes was going very fast. She was, the skipper thought, one of the Apgar boats, bound to China, and calling at the chief ports en route. I think this was the finest night of the whole voyage, the sea motionless and the temperature not above 84 degrees, while the heavens glittered with splendid constellations, some of which were almost unnatural in their brilliancy. The moon rose at 9, and we remained on deck till midnight, thoroughly enjoying the lovely tropical night. By thus stopping up, we saw a phenomenon that is given to but few people to observe. From 11 to 12, several light showers fell around us, though none occurred where we were. And at 11:30, I saw what I took to be an arch of gray vapor spanning the heavens in the northeast. For some little time, I couldn't imagine what it was, and at length called the skipper's attention to it, who immediately said, "Why, that's a lunar rainbow, and the first one I've seen for many a long day." Of course, no colors were visible in it to us, and it looked just like a band of vapor, though perfectly well defined. It is a cause for great satisfaction to me that I have seen a lunar rainbow, for I will probably never see one again. And while it was not so beautiful a spectacle as a solar rainbow, yet it was so unusual and odd that I will never forget its appearance. Latitude at noon, 18 degrees 46 minutes north, longitude 90 degrees 17 minutes east. November 5th. We experienced very calm weather during the last 24 hours, and the patience of skipper and crew is almost exhausted. It is rather annoying to be within 80 miles of the lightships and not move faster than a knot an hour. A little after noon, a slight ripple was seen on the surface of the oil-like sea, but it died away in 10 minutes, and for the rest of the day we were as idle as a painted ship upon a painted ocean. All hands forward are sick of the voyage. They show it in their manner of lounging about and in their way of going aloft. If we had a decent boatswain that would give them the taste of a rope's end every now and then, just by way of variety, they'd be a different set. But our boatswain still chums in with the men and mixes with them in the forecastle, instead of keeping to himself and answering all attempts at familiarity with a gentle tap of a belaying pin. As we draw nearer port, old Kelly's fear of the natives has proportionately increased, until he repeats his vow of never setting foot ashore as long as the ship lies in the Hoogly. Carson is very ugly, and struts about the forward deck cock of the walk, even in the presence of the second mate, who I truly believe is afraid of him. A very significant change has taken place in the color of the water, which has turned to a muddy green from its old deep blue. This means, of course, that we are on soundings, for the first time in more than 4 months. How strange it seems to be in this dirty water, charged with the mud and slime of the Ganges after so many weeks of the ultramarine of the open sea. Really, I don't suppose this water we are in at the present moment is nearly so muddy and opaque as New York Bay or the Hudson River, yet it looks a great deal worse to us. Latitude 20 degrees 4 minutes north, longitude 89 degrees 20 minutes east. November 6th. At last and alas, our voyage is nearly over. At 7 o'clock this morning, the seaman stationed for the purpose on the upper foretop sail yard reported a sail, and not long afterwards it was visible from the deck, proving to be a pilot boat, and in another half hour we raised the Eastern Channel lightship, about 16 miles off. In a few minutes, smoke was reported in the northwest, and in a little more than an hour one of the magnificent Hoogly towboats came alongside, and after a little palavering between her skipper and ours, she passed us 2 immense 22-inch hawsers, and, going full speed ahead, walked off with us at 9 knots, faster than we had gone for many a day. We were still far out of sight of land, but for the discolored water might have been in the bay for all we knew, the land being so low that it is visible only a few miles. Presently I caught a glimpse of a brig, which I saw at once was not a merchantman, and I could not make her out till Captain Kingdon told me she was a pilot boat. Here was the first of a regular string of surprises, a brig-rigged pilot boat. Truly a novelty. I had never even heard of one, yet there she was. Instead of the lean, handy, fore and aft 70-ton schooners that I had been accustomed to at home, here was not a brigantine, but a full-rigged brig, heavily sparred like a man of war, with paint ports and immensely high bulwarks. These little ships, for one might call them two-masted ships, are moored very securely and permanently, ships being towed alongside of the brig instead of the latter working up to the ship. The only time they ever shift their moorings is when the cyclone parts their cables, and generally they are never seen again. Moving across the broad sweep of poop on the pilot boat, I saw a number of figures clad in white duck and blue cloth, And this, with the great quantity of highly polished brass, led me to the belief that our skipper must be mistaken, for surely this is a man of war, with her heavy tops, painted ports, bright brasswork, and uniformed officers. In a few minutes, though, a large whaleboat shot from under her stern, pulled by 8 native oarsmen, in whose stern was seated one of those handsomely dressed officers. This, in reality, was the pilot, and I was more astonished at him than I was at the pilot boat. Instead of a rough seafaring man, such as one ordinarily meets in such a calling, a gentleman stepped over the side, followed by a native whom I afterward found was his servant, with his master's bags and traps. The pilot was dressed in duck trousers, with blue serge coat with gold lace and brass buttons, and well pipe-clayed canvas shoes. The captain introduced him as Mr. Tucker, and it took us not more than a minute to find out all about Vigilance races in England, for Tucker had just returned from a leave of absence and had seen some of the matches. Poor Vigilant won only 5 out of 17 races. There must have been something radically wrong. I must say it was delightful to have someone on board with whom you could exchange ideas, and for the rest of the afternoon my wife and Tucker and I were engaged in an uninterrupted flow of conversation. It doesn't take long to get anywhere after a powerful tugboat has passed you her line, and 2 hours had not gone by before we could make out the feather-like tops of the tallest palm trees, followed shortly after by the lofty white shaft of the lighthouse at Sauger, where the Hoogly empties into the sea. By and by, on approaching closely the shore, we saw everywhere little else than thick jungle, conjuring up visions of cobras and venomous insects. And just as the sun dipped, we let go the starboard anchor in a most beautiful little bight just inside the tall lighthouse. Thus, for the first time in 127 days, the anchor touched the bottom, during which we sailed almost precisely 12,600 miles. Before the anchor had touched bottom, we were the center of a ring of native boats whose occupants wished to sell fruit, and, I dare say, rum to the sailors. The natives came aboard in perfect swarms, the thinnest, hungriest, most beggarly crowd I ever gazed upon. Their legs were like jointed ramrods, and their arms pitiful to behold, while every one of them wore such a cowed expression and almost groveled before you that you were moved to throw the unhappy wretches all the coins you had. That night we frequently heard the roaring of tigers in the Sundarbans, as the swampy region at the delta of the Ganges is called, as well as the barking of jackals. Indeed, it is said that the best tiger shooting in all India is to be found in the Sundarbans, but the density of the jungle and the miasmatic swamps prevent the intrusion of man. Here, then, the tiger dwells supreme, safe from the rifle of that most indefatigable of created beings, the British sportsman. And here tonight I heard what I never expected to hear, the roaring of the royal beast in his wild haunts. November 7th. We had to lie at our anchors till noon today to wait for the tide. The captain of the towboat came over to supper last night and invited me to breakfast with him at 9. Of course I went, and besides being regaled with a good square meal of broiled fowl, fried potatoes, good coffee, and all manner of fresh fruit, I saw in detail a specimen of the finest towboats in existence. The river Hoogly is probably the most treacherous navigable stream in the world, and to its ever-shifting sandbars is added a powerful current, varying in speed from 5 knots an hour in the dry season to 9 during the rains. The number of sailing ships that enter and clear annually is very great, Calcutta, Sydney, and San Francisco being the 3 great sailing ship ports of the world. Therefore, in order to handle the immense heavy ships in the swift current with absolute safety, or as near as man can get to it, the very best and most powerful towboats are necessary, and they must be able to go to sea in bad weather as well, the sandheads rendering navigation very dangerous, if not impossible, except in the channels, long before land is sighted, ships being often picked up as much as 40 miles offshore. Hence, I was very keen on seeing one of these boats, and I was very much gratified when Captain Arden asked me to breakfast with him. The steamer was called the Rescue. She was built of steel, with big double funnels and very high amidships, after the manner of the great White Star freighters. Forward she had fully 15 feet freeboard, with about 8 feet aft, and was of about 600 gross tons. The The rescue was handsomely furnished, her dining room being at least 16 feet square, with beautifully tiled floors, and everything was in first-rate order, particularly the table linen and glassware and plate. Unfortunately, I was not enough of a machinist to have appreciated her engines, but the engine room and stokehole looked like beehives with the native stokers and oilers, there being 47 men in the crew all told, a large number of men being necessary to handle 22-inch hawsers, as may be well imagined. The captain, first and second officers, and the chief engineer are always Englishmen, the rest natives. At 1 p.m. we broke out our anchor and towed up to Diamond Harbor, a little more than halfway from Saugur to Calcutta, or about 50 miles. The passage up the river was charming. Extending away on either hand as far as the eye could see stretched thousands of acres of rice fields, as green as new turf, while numbers of strange-looking native boats added a wonderful amount of novelty and picturesqueness to the scene. At intervals of every hour or so we would meet outward bound steamers, some large like the British India and P&O boats, others small and loaded to the plimsoll mark with chattering, naked Hindus journeying down the coast to Akyab, Rangoon, or Moulmein. While we were under way, from anchorage to anchorage, the pilot never left the deck for a moment, having his supper brought to him on the poop by his servant, thus never losing sight of the river for an instant. Landmarks are scattered along the river at frequent intervals, and range marks are visible at short distances in the worst places, indicating the exact situation of the channel. Though the riverbed shifts constantly that even these precautions cannot be relied upon, the boats are stationed at the dangerous places, with telegraphic communication with the city as well as Saugur, so that when by sounding any alteration in the channel can be perceived, the change can be instantly wired in either direction. One of the articles brought on board by the pilot's servant was a blackboard about 3 feet square and a couple of chalk pencils. We were at a loss to know what these things were for till I saw Tucker go forward on the forecastle head, write some cabalistic signs on the board, and then hold it high above his head so that those on the towboat could see the signal and understand the instructions he had written. The most experienced Hoagly pilots are exceedingly well paid, being in receipt of salaries varying from 2,000 to 2,500 rupees a month, equal to more than $6,000 per year, a large sum in a country where 25 cents will provide as much luxury as a dollar will with us. At sunset we let go the anchor at Diamond Harbor, an exquisite spot, particularly lovely now in the mellow twilight of the tropics. Unfortunately, the beautiful glow lasted but a few minutes, but presently we had the moon riding high in the heavens, showing us the windings of the river bathed in her white, soft light. We sat on the poop till midnight talking with Mr. Tucker, who gladly afforded us information about the best place to stop at in Calcutta and the various customs of the strange land we were about to visit. Just as 8 bells were struck, we went below and were lulled to sleep by the yelping of jackals and the snoring of the pilot's servant, who lay asleep on deck just under our port. November 8th. We got our anchor at 4:30 this morning, and when I went on deck at 7, we were not more than 10 miles from Budge, where we were to leave the ship, that being the place for discharging the oil, being about 12 miles from the city. The scenery along the river banks had changed somewhat, the landscape being covered with clumps of bamboo and the beautiful date palm growing in the midst of the never-ending rice fields. In the broad reaches of the river, unwieldy, old-fashioned Arab barks tacked slowly across our bows or under the stern, giving a decidedly quaint aspect to the now lively river, for scores of native boats and several small steamers were skimming about, forerunners of the traffic and bustle 10 miles farther up. We had yet to pack our trunks and valises, though, and by the time we had finished this disagreeable job, we were nearly at Budge. I gave my duck suits to the boys and a thick pilot coat to the mate, transfixing him with delight thereby, Mr. Kelly coming in for a half a dozen pairs of immensely thick socks. At 11 o'clock, the heavy splash of the anchor told us that our long voyage was over, and we went about bidding a sorrowful goodbye to the old ship and her company, not forgetting Pete, who was going back the same way he came out. My wife and I were actually loath to leave the old Mandalore in which we had passed so many happy weeks. As Captain Arden had offered to take us up to the city in the rescue, though, we could not delay, and with a general goodbye from the crew and a hearty handclasp from Mr. Ryan, who seemed loath to see us depart, we stepped over the rail and onto the deck of the rescue, Captain Kingdon accompanying us. Lying at their moorings at Budge Budge, I noticed, as we passed, the big sailing ships Claverdon, Clan Buchanan, and Dunfermline, the latter not far from 3,000 tons. Thus ended, all too soon for me, this voyage of the good ship Mandalore, that carried us so safely and happily across nearly 13,000 miles of blue water. May she always have a fair wind and a smooth sea, and may good luck follow her genial skipper, whose good nature and thoughtful consideration added so much to our enjoyment of the voyage. The end. End of section 20. End of A Deep Water Voyage by Paul Eves Stevenson.